I recently made a video called How Do You Know When a Drummer is Good? How do you know if you are a good drummer? And somebody who watched that video left a really intriguing question on the comments. It was essentially, how do I balance drums and life? And he particularly mentioned it's really tricky to balance making progress and playing gigs on my drums when I've got life responsibilities. And he mentioned having a wife and children. And there are a ton of you out there that are probably wondering the same thing. And it's something I struggle with too. There was another commenter on the same video who was struggling with motivation. How do I make progress if I'm not really motivated? I really think these two questions go together. So stick around to the end of the video and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let's get into it. Even though I've been playing drums for a really long time and I feel like I'm pretty good, I know that there's a lot of progress that I could be making. And at the same time, I have a full-time day job. I have a family. I've got a wife that I've been married to for a long time who I absolutely love. She's the absolute best. And I have two busy teenagers. So there's not really a ton of time to practice or spend hours and hours and hours on end on my craft. So how do you make it balance? I want to say off the bat that I don't know if this is right for everybody, and I don't even know if it's perfectly right for me, but I know that these are the things that have helped as I've kind of fought this fight through my life. So if you've got other suggestions or you've got things that have worked for you or challenges that you're still facing, please, by all means, drop us a comment. Let's help each other out. Very first, I think you need to be really, really crystal clear about your goals. What are you trying to accomplish with drumming? Are you trying to play a certain number of gigs every year? Are you trying to get to a certain level of playing? Are you trying to make a certain amount of money? Are you trying to tour, record albums, win awards? What are you trying to do? For me, at this point in my career, it's way, way more about development and progress than it will ever be about any of those destination type goals. My goals are way more about process and consistent effort and routine. So once you've got some goals in mind, I strongly recommend you sit down with your spouse or your children or even bandmates, anybody who's a stakeholder. Your influence, the way you live your life is going to have a major impact on them. And be clear about what those goals are. State your needs, state your desires, and then be willing to listen to them as well. You need to work on aligning and coexisting with each other's priorities because you're going to have things you want to do and your spouse is too. And if your kids are teenagers like mine, they've got their own priorities and activities too. So as you discuss, you've got to find a way to make all those priorities fit together. But you do need to be clear that drumming is important to you and the people around you need to understand that. And it's not my goal to give marriage advice per se, but I really believe that a healthy relationship should have room for all of your desires as far as that goes, unless you want to rob banks or something like that. And you need to be really sincere about finding out what does your spouse want, what is important to your partner, and be committed to finding a way to make those things work too. And I know I'll get some pushback from the optimization experts out there, but no one priority has to be the priority all the time. They can shift around. They can change in importance and levels of importance from time to time. But I think it's really important to emphasize that your priorities can work together. You can help your significant other achieve their goals and desires, and they can help you achieve yours. And I think optimally, if they work together, that's a win-win for everybody. One thing I've always appreciated about playing gigs is that yes, I'll say drumming can be an expensive habit. I mean, if you looked at the price of cymbals these days, it's insane. But a lot of people in my area do things like ride ATVs, or they have bowling night, or they'll go play poker, or maybe they even go to a club and have a few drinks. And they're all coming home at the end of the night with less money than they left with. And I'll fully admit that I've been very, very fortunate in my life that as I play gigs, yeah, I might be gone for the evening, for the afternoon, or a weekend here and there, but I'm always going to come home with more money than I left with, and that makes things easier. So one thing I've tried to do, at least since I've been married, is make sure that any money that comes in from gigs is a benefit to everybody in the household. That doesn't mean I give up every dollar of it. I definitely am going to buy sticks or heads or the cymbal or whatever it is so that my hobby, as it were, my gigging, it helps pay for itself. But we have definitely used my gigging money, and when I was teaching a ton of lessons, that money as well, to help supplement the household income. Yeah, my drumming habit pays for itself, but it also helps pay for other things that our family needs. As a side note, and again, this is not marriage or legal or financial advice or any of those things. You do what works for you. But I'm a huge proponent of sharing finances in a marriage. What's ours is kind of the way that we've always run our marriage, and it's worked really, really well. You share the good times together, you share the struggles together. All right, the next one, and I really think this is key to balancing progress in drumming and life, is to find a pattern or a routine that works and then commit to it and be consistent. If you say you're going to practice every day, practice every day. That doesn't mean you can't miss here or there, but don't go a week or 2 weeks or a month and say, oh man, I was going to practice, but I just didn't. Then you're not really committed and you're not being consistent. You got to have those two things. And I'll say too, that if you agree with your spouse that you're going to practice for 30 minutes a day or an hour a day, and it's going to be between this time and this time, stick to that. When your spouse knows that you're going to be committed to the limits that you've set, say, hey, I'm going to be done playing at 6 o'clock, and you're done playing at 6 o'clock, they know that they can trust you. They don't have to go down and bug you and say, hey, it's time to eat, or were you going to take the trash out? They know. If you said 6 o'clock, you're done at 6 o'clock and you become really reliable. I think this is especially true when you go out on gigs. If you've said, hey, I'll be home by midnight, man, be home by midnight. And if something comes up, communicate. The spouse that knows that you're going to keep your commitments with your hobbies, with your friends, with your side hustle, whatever it is a spouse that can be really, really supportive. And I really think the flip side of that is that if you're not able to keep those commitments, if you always go a half an hour longer or you're home a couple hours too late, then it becomes very, very easy to resent that you're spending time on this thing that takes you away from the family. So be realistic about it, commit to it, and then keep the commitment. And of course, in family life, things are going to happen. You're going to have weeks where emergencies pop up, or you're going to travel unexpectedly, or there's going to be something that interrupts that consistent schedule that you've established. And so a couple concepts come to mind. Number one is it doesn't have to be perfect. You miss a day, fine, you miss a day. Get back on track the next day. But there are a couple of things that I talk to my students about that maybe will be helpful for you. One is a dinner plate analogy. And again, from time to time, you're going to have way more on your plate than you normally would. And so what I always tell my students is, if you got to put more on your plate, try not to kick anything off the plate. Just take a smaller portion. If you're normally an hour a day guy and you get really busy or something comes up with a family member, maybe you're going to be half an hour a day guy for a while. Or maybe if you're 5 or 6 days a week, maybe you're going to be 4 or 5 days a week for a little while. Or another way to think about this is just the idea of no 0 days. My wife and I actually lift weights together. And so one of the things we talk about is, some days you go absolute beast mode and you're lifting weights and pushing hard. And maybe the next day you're just not feeling it. And so you show up in the gym and you do what you can. Both of those are totally valid ways to push ahead. But what you didn't do was skip. So if in an extreme week where things are just nuts and maybe you sat down at the kit for 5 minutes and just did a warm up, great, you showed up. But again, my philosophy in the gym is no workout is ever the workout. And so my goal is just to be consistent, just to show up as many days as I possibly can and give what I can, whether it's a lot or a little. The idea of just being in the habit and doing it is what I want. I want it to be sustainable for the rest of my life. And I feel the exact same way about playing drums. Okay, we're finally to the second comment that was made. And it was the, how do I get motivated to make progress? I want to say a couple things. The first one I'll say is maybe you don't need to make progress. If drums are not your living and they're not the main thing that you do, and you've got enough skill to have fun and enjoy the music you're playing, man, why are you trying to be Dave Weckl if you're happy the way you are? It's totally fine. The goal is just to enjoy music at whatever level. But if you feel like you should be motivated or you want to get better, you just don't know how to approach that, and especially, again, you're busy, you've got other commitments, maybe this next strategy is for you. One of the best analogies I've ever heard about just staying committed is the idea of art versus craft. And the way that it was explained to me was, imagine that you are a woodworker and you run a shop where you create wooden furniture, tables, chairs, things like that. Art is when you walk in and you make an absolute masterpiece. It's beautiful. People are amazed by it. You're amazed by it. Wow, we made this great thing. Versus craft, which is just show up every day and make things. And maybe you'll make 1,000 chairs that are just chairs and they do their job, or you'll make 100 tables, but you show up every day and you just work. The idea being that if you want to be in a position to create real art, you have to have put in the work part. And those musicians that make art on a consistent basis, that just have really powerful musical performances consistently, have put in a ton of time on the craft part, just showing up and doing the work. There was an interview years ago with a very famous basketball player, and it was after a game where he had just displayed amazing athleticism and great creativity with the ball, had won the game. And afterwards, the interviewer said, "How in the world are you coming up with these shots? I mean, you're doing all this crazy stuff. You're just improvising with the ball. You're an artist with the ball." And he answered and said, "It may look like that, but there's nothing I do on this court that I haven't done 1,000 times in the gym by myself during practice." And I think that's just a super powerful concept for drummers. Show up, work on your craft, and then you'll put yourself in a position to create art. At the end of the day, you could be the most skilled and successful musician who's ever lived, and there would still be room to improve on your instrument. So again, not to get too philosophical on you, but for me, the path is the goal. The goal is just to stay on the path. I want to develop habits that make it possible for me to play drums and keep making progress for the rest of my life. I sincerely hope that any of this has made sense or been helpful or made you think or any of those things. Thank you so much for watching till the end. If you're still here, you are a very rare human, and I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope that you'll consider subscribing if you aren't already, and I'd really appreciate it if you would click like, and if you haven't yet, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I'll see you on the next one.